Today we're going to take a look at the 2022 Honda CRF150R and its brother with many different names, the CRF150RB that's also called the Big Wheel, hence the B added to its name, and it's also referred to commonly as the Expert model. We'll talk about where Honda's baddest dirt bike that's meant for kids but will scare a lot of adults fits into their current dirt bike lineup, and we'll go over some of its specs and features too. Plus, we'll start it up and show you how wild this little thing sounds, what Honda changed for 2022, and a lot more. But first, if you guys find any info in this video helpful, please take a second and hit the like button. Liking the video and commenting below really helps with growing this channel through YouTube's algorithm, which in return helps me create more videos, and I really appreciate the help. So first up, where does the 150R fit into Honda's current dirt bike lineup? The first thing to keep in mind when looking at Honda's dirt bikes is the last letter after the engine size in their model name, as that tells you what it was designed for. The F models are Honda's regular run-of-the-mill models that don't have a ton of performance behind them, but with that, they also have the least amount of maintenance you'll need to worry about and cheaper price tags too. But this model has an R at the end, so that means it's a race bike, which means a lot more performance, a step up in components used all around the bike, and yep, you guessed it, higher price tags while also needing more maintenance and upkeep at the end of the day. And now with that out of the way, let's jump into some more info on the 150R. Now, do you have any options when buying a 150R? Surprisingly, you do, with the standard CRF 150R and then the CRF 150RB, which is the big wheel version. And what's the difference aside from the obvious fact that it should have larger wheels because of its name? You have a few things that set them apart. First up is that they have different gearing, with a 50-tooth sprocket in the rear on the standard model and a 56-tooth setup on the big wheel, while sharing the same 15-tooth countershaft sprocket as well as a 420 chain. They share the same fork, which we'll dive more into later, but you can see the standard model's fork legs are dropped down more in the triple tree. And out back you have the same rear suspension setup with a longer swing arm on the big wheel, helping to make their travel numbers different, and we'll cover that more in depth shortly. And I won't bore you guys with talking about all of the rake, trail, seat height, and other slight measurement differences between them, so I'll throw them up on the screen now so you can check them out. Now let's jump into the chassis and suspension. Unlike the other R models with aluminum frames, the 150R has a high tensile steel frame with large diameter frame tubing, and it's the same story for the subframe crossmember too. To say this setup is strong would be an understatement. I have yet to hear of any frame issues, and we've seen kids and adults sending these things through the air with the same frame since 2007. Now, Honda did find an issue with the swing arm, but they quickly fixed it with a recall in 2008 for the 07 and 08 model years that might be affected, but other than that, this chassis has been rock solid since they corrected the swing arm issue. And when it comes to suspension up front, you have a fully adjustable 37mm leading axle inverted Showa cartridge style fork that features a friction reducing design to help improve both compression and rebound control. Suspension travel is the same for both models, and it comes in at 10.8 inches. Then out back we have Honda's ProLink rear suspension design that utilizes a fully adjustable Showa shock to help you put the power to the ground, and it's bringing in 10.7 inches of travel on the standard and 11.1 inches of travel on the big wheel. Then we move over to the brakes that are shared between both models, and up front is a single piston caliper that's biting down on a 220mm disc. While out back you have another single piston caliper with a smaller 190mm disc that also features an HRC work style rear brake system that integrates the rear master cylinder and fluid reservoir, eliminating the need for those extra parts, and in return saves weight because race bike. And those brakes are helping slow down a 17-inch wheel up front on the standard model that's wrapped with a 70/100 tire, while on the big wheel you have a larger 19-inch wheel that shares the same tire sizing. Then out back you have a 14-inch wheel on the standard model wrapped with a 90/100 tire, and you guessed it again, the big wheel has a larger wheel out back coming in at 16 inches with the same size rear tire. Now let's get into the engine and drivetrain package, which is this bike's bread and butter in my opinion, but then again, that could be said about almost any bike that gets your blood pumping like this one can. Now we're going to geek out a little bit, but to get the basics out of the way, it's a 147.7cc water-cooled single-cylinder 4-stroke engine that utilizes Honda's legendary Unicam head design with 4 valves and a 11:7:1 compression ratio. Fuel is being fed to it not by fuel injectors like all of the other R models, but instead we head back to the 20th century for a keen 32mm flat side carb with an accelerator pump to help bring in more accurate fuel control, for a more crisp throttle response and overall control, which is what you want when you're fixing to send this thing off the face of a jump, and so on. The engine has a twin sump lubrication system, which is something they went away from a few years ago on the 250 and 450R models, but that helps separate the oil supply for the crankshaft, piston, and valve train from the clutch and transmission. This ensures a cool supply of oil to the clutch to try and help eliminate potential clutch and transmission material contamination, and it reduces the amount of circulating oil, which gives Honda the chance to use a smaller oil pump. And speaking of oil pumps, you have vertically split crankcases that feature a built-in oil pump that helps reduce the overall weight, again, compared to a conventional design. The crankshaft is made from low carbon steel with carburized main journals for the highest level of durability possible, as these engines are spun to the moon by kids that usually don't have much in the way of mechanical sympathy while racing and for extended periods of time, which is also why it has a forged piston connected to a double carburized connecting rod that's moving up and down inside a Nicosil lined cylinder to try and help bring down some of that heat while extending its lifespan as much as possible. You also have a gear-driven balancer to try and help bring down some of those vibrations, and it drives the water pump as well. And while on the topic of water, this bike has dual radiators mounted on your left and right behind the shrouds to keep it cool. Now I could ramble on even more about this engine, but I'm probably boring most of you, so we'll start to move along. And with all of that being said about it, how much power does the CRF150R make? Well, it's pumping out 23.5 horsepower at 12,500 RPM and 10.4 foot-pounds of torque at 10,000 RPM. And to put that in context, this bike makes more horsepower than the CRF 250F while weighing about 80 pounds less, and if you've never ridden one, I highly suggest you do, as these things are a blast when you pair up that much power with its short wheelbase. I guarantee it'll put a massive smile on your face no matter how many years you've been riding. And helping you put that power to the ground is a close ratio 5-speed transmission with a 6-disc clutch, providing the needed surface area to handle the power and abuse these things are put through on the track. Now, does it have electric start or any fancy electronics like the other R models? Nope, this thing is still kickstart only, and thankfully you do have an internal auto decompression with a hot start system operated by this lever next to the clutch to help fire this thing up whether it's hot or cold. And to finish off our section on the engine, the entire assembly tips the scales at only 43.6 pounds, and the last time this engine package saw any tweaks from Honda dates back to 2012, so I'd say they've pretty much ironed out all the kinks. Now, before we start it up, let's talk about what Honda changed for 2022 on the CRF150R models. The first change comes in the way of pricing, with an increase from last year coming in at $50, bringing the 2022 CRF150R MSRP up to $52.49, and if you want the big wheel, it'll now bump you up to $54.49. The last changes come in the way of plastic colors and graphics, with Honda swapping out the white number plates from last year with red and throwing blue graphics in the mix so they look more like Honda's latest 250 and 450R race bikes. Now let's fire it up and show you what it sounds like, and then we'll come back for a few more things. And that's the 2022 Honda CRF 150R. Now, this bike isn't for the faint of heart, and it's technically a race bike, but many people buy these just because they want the power and suspension it has to offer with a lower seat height, as some of those boxes you can't get in the CRF F model lineup. You sacrifice both power and suspension with the F models, which is something I think Honda should reconsider their approach on, as some people want suspension like this bike offers but don't necessarily want the power, nor do they want the added maintenance that comes with it when compared to an F model. Odds are though, if you're watching this video, then you don't mind the small headaches that come with a bike like this because you want the performance at the end of the day, and that's something this bike delivers. It's been relatively bulletproof aside from the swing arm hiccup that we mentioned earlier, and then you have the product update campaign from back in 2007 with defective camshafts, but other than that, these bikes have been tanks. They can be a little temperamental at times, but that's to be expected when you're buying a high-strung race bike that doesn't come with a warranty at the end of the day. Is this bike for everyone? No. Is it for inexperienced riders? Definitely not. Grabbing a handful of throttle on this bike will do a lot more damage than doing so with a more relaxed F model. However, if the seat height fits you and you want one bad machine for the trails, even though it wasn't built for that technically, this is for you. And of course, if you're planning to go racing, that's what this bike was built for. Now, I could ramble on for quite some time talking about the different models and this or that, but I don't want to bore you guys any more than I already have. And now I'm curious, what are your thoughts on the CRF150R platform? This bike hasn't seen any noticeable updates in a decade now. If you had a chance to sit down with Honda, what would you ask them to change next? Let me know what you guys are thinking down in the comments section, and I'll be joining in on the conversation too. But that's a wrap for this one, guys. Thanks again for watching and supporting all of this. I really appreciate it, and we'll see you in the next one. I want to take a quick second and say thank you to Southern Honda Powersports for opening their doors to me and allowing me to come pick through their inventory for these videos. They are a massive Honda Powersports dealer here in Chattanooga, Tennessee, with tons of inventory from new Hondas to used Harleys and everything in between that they sell to people from all over the USA. So check out the link in the description below and head over to their website to see if they can save you some money on your next toy.